Hey guys, how's it going? Yeah, it's on this one. That sucks. That's annoying. Test. Test. Okay, that's working, I guess. Test. Test. Hey Trillion, how's it going? It's working, I guess. Test. Test. Hey Trillion, how's it going? It's working, I guess. Test. Test. Right, now the echo should be gone. Yeah, I started it and then I thought I was going to my gaming channel, not my regular one. So I ended. I was like, "What? What? Why isn't it working?" And now it's working, and it was working. And then I left. And I was like, "Damn it! Damn it!" All right, all right. Now that it's working, let's get this party started. 12. What is this? 12 design arguments that aren't evidence for God. From silly to sillier. Let's go. Ooh, more arguments that aren't evidence for God. Woohoo. I don't think CC understands that arguments aren't evidence. Like I have an argument for God that's equally as good as all of these. Potatoes. Potatoes exist, therefore God. Potatoes, therefore God. That's an argument. Is that evidence? Nope. Arguments are not evidence. The evidence is contained if you can justify the premises with some kind of novel prediction stuff. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of words. Oh, nice, Travis. Darth got kicked out of Clubhouse. That is wonderful. That is wonderful. Like we need to invite him to our server. I want Darth in my server. That would be beautiful. It should. You should like to hear lots of 100 combination of words that aren't evidence because arguments are somehow useful for something. Not really.
My brain has just been fried in preparing for this. I've been waking up in the morning like, oh, I gotta do more theistic arguments. But it's all right.
There's so many. All right.
Do you know why scientists don't give arguments? Because no one cares about the words you can come up with in your head. They want something you can demonstrate in the world. That's why scientists don't come up with arguments. They come up with evidence.
Here we go. The argument from bananas. Nice.
Yeah, all right. So
This is the best one they have. This is the best argument that they have in the entire video. Just so you know.
So that's our first design arguments. Consider a banana. Okay, just kidding. We have Aquinas' fifth way.
Ooh, look, not evidence.
So that one might be lost on some people too. Okay, Aquinas' fifth way. Whatever has ends or goals is either intelligent or is directed by intelligence. Efficient causes in nature have ends or goals and work together towards the goal of harmony and order. 3, efficient causes in nature are not intelligent. So efficient causes in nature are directed by intelligence.
So this is called begging the question. If you say whatever has ends or goals is either intelligence or directed by intelligence, that's just saying the same thing twice. Like essentially, you're saying there's a property in intelligence, which is that it has goals, like you have outcomes that you want to achieve. Like, oh, guess what? That's kind of what it means. That's a property of intelligence. There's nothing, it's just a tautology. You're saying the same thing twice. Saying that efficient causes in nature have goals or ends is just begging the question. You're just saying, oh, I assume nature has goals and ends. Therefore, it was required by intelligence. Like, can you demonstrate this? Can you show evidence of this premise too? Can you demonstrate this in a lab? Are there any novel predictions of this? Let's see.
Cameron, I had notes, brief notes, along with all of these arguments that would sketch what the main justification is for the key premise. But I'm thinking, unless you request it at this point, I guess we should just move on. What do you think?
Let's move on. And what I can, if you can send me those notes, I don't know if you've got them in a format that I can share.
Ash Media, this is the 12 design arguments. His 100 one is in the top right. You can see it up here, this thingy. So probably go through some of those eventually, but yeah, his 100 non-evidences for God. That's what we should change arguments. Just say 100 non-evidences.
Share with people, but that might be a solution. Is I could share that along with the slides for people.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. It bothers me that outlining an argument, one premise of an argument would just be like, oh, why would you ever think that's true? It's like, well, I have the justification here. I want to share it real quick, but
yeah.
we should have probably just separated out. Okay, let's have an episode on just cosmological arguments, just ontological arguments, things like that.
Well, this is just the beginning. We can do a lot of different things with this.
Okay, so Etienne Gilson, that's the quote there illustrating justification for the main premise of Aquinas' argument.
To admit that things order themselves by accident is to admit there is room in the universe for an effect, namely their very order without a cause. No. So like if things order themselves by accident, as in some kind of force of nature, like if randomness is a force, that would be a force of nature, then it can happen uncaused. So the fact that you can insert God of the gaps kind of our thinking and say, we can't explain this. It could be a God. Doesn't mean it is a God. So this is stupid. That's a stupid argument. Is sufficient to explain the particular function of the body, yet it by no means explains why the different bodies in their different functions arrange themselves in harmonious whole. Laws of physics. Laws of physics are the explanation there. There's no mind to it. Done.
There. We have a simplified.
So not evidence of God. Nowhere in that argument provides evidence of God.
Version, which is just that. Next slide. Intelligence underlies teleology. There's
intelligence underlies teleology. Begging the question. I mean, again, it's technically just saying the same thing twice again. Teleology is design. So, thank you for the follow, Anthony Harris. LARP. So intelligence underlies design. Again, saying the same thing twice because just design is a kind of thing intelligence does. There is irreducible teleology immanent to the natural order. Wrong. So irreducible things can come about by evolutionary processes. Like if we take the stone arch example, if you have a stone arch, like a stone arch is irreducibly complex, meaning that if you took out any of the stones, the entire structure would collapse. But to build a stone arch, what you do is you build up a bunch of extra rocks underneath the stone arch, and then you place the arch on top of that. And then you remove the stuff underneath, and it produces this irreducibly complex structure. So there's a natural way to produce irreducible complexity that has absolutely nothing to do with God. You don't need intelligence there. And nothing about the universe is irreducibly complex. Like there's no the laws of physics aren't irreducibly complex. They can all be explained by like more reducible things like string theory or whatever. So this is not an evidence for God at all.
Irreducible teleology.
Just begging the question. So irreducible teleology, well, that's not even in the first premise, but first, you would need to demonstrate that that's true in the universe, which you can't. Arguments don't do that. You would need some novel testable predictions, which you don't have.
Immanent to the natural world and all throughout the natural world. So intelligence underlies the natural world. Okay. Design in biology. Let's begin with the origin of organic life. I don't know about you, Cameron, but when I was in high school, they were still teaching the Miller experiment. Did they teach that to you in high school?
I don't remember actually. What is that experiment?
The Miller
So argument from ignorance, the very first premise is an argument from ignorance fallacy. Given what we know, complex life in the universe cannot have originated by known naturalistic processes. Are there unknown naturalistic processes? Yes. Problem solved. Second, it violates the consensus in biology, which is that it's done by known natural processes. So if it's done by known natural processes, like given the consensus on all of the work in the field and all of the novel testable predictions in the field, that means you're wrong. It means any position that disagrees with that is irrational. It's silly. It's dumb. It's going against the science. So to accept this argument is to go against the science. You have to be ignorant of science and think that somehow all of the consensus is wrong, that abiogenesis is the most likely, best, most evidence-supported position that to explain the origin of life. So to be a theist is to go against science. This is why there's a conflict between science and religion.
Experiment, let's see if I can remember it, is an experiment. The main guy was named Miller, but he had some solution that they thought resembled like the prebiotic soup of Earth's early atmosphere.
I don't think I have no clue if I was taught it, but I remember hearing about it.
And so what he did is just basically shoot like bolts of electricity into this prebiotic suit, and he was able to synthesize amino acids. And this was touted as being this groundbreaking experiment that is a clue to how life originated, which has since just been completely abandoned. Like no one defends the Miller experiment anymore. But
false. So no one defends the Miller experiment as being representative of Earth's early atmosphere. So they created new ones. And the new ones show that you can get the same results knowing Earth's early atmosphere accurately. So the same experiment results in amino acids regardless of which one you use. Like, so it doesn't, like, they've done new experiments to correct for the new data and you get the same results. Here we go. Here it is. Urey, derp. Other experiments. This experiment inspired many others. This suggests the origin of significant amounts of amino acids may have occurred on Earth's even with the atmosphere containing carbon dioxide and nitrogen. So all of these experiments were repeated. This one was 1978. This one was 2007. 2007. You can't see that on the screen because my face is in the way. Hide my face. 2007, Fox and Douglas. 2008. 2008. So these experiments that he's discrediting because he's a silly theist have actually been repeated with new data to show that, yeah, this is all the same results apply to Earth's early atmosphere, no matter which version you use. The one we thought it was 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 2020. So that's like almost 50 years ago. Or what we know it was today, you still get amino acids. It's still the origin of life. It's still why it's the consensus in every field of biology and why no one takes the design hypothesis seriously. So again, to support this argument, you have to reject science.
I asked around, and apparently it is still taught in high schools. I can't believe that. I couldn't believe that it's still taught in high schools. Anyway, we have an argument in biology from organic life. Given what we know, complex organic life in the universe could not have originated naturalistically. If given what we know, complex organic life could not have originated naturalistically, it's reasonable to believe that it originated supernaturalistically.
Wrong. So that's argument from ignorance. Number 2. First thing, given what we know, that's like current knowledge. Currently, we don't know of a naturalistic way to generate the origin of life. That's fair. Does that mean there isn't one? Does that mean that it's reasonable to conclude that it's not natural? No. That's like saying if we see some phenomenon like lightning or whatever, and we don't know how the lightning originated from naturalistic processes 2,000 years ago, it's reasonable to make up an entirely new, baseless, extra ontology of other stuff completely different from all of the stuff we know about and has no reason to think it exists, and then say, this thing we can't explain is done by that. No, that isn't reasonable. That's never going to be reasonable. That's a blatant argument from ignorance fallacy, saying we can't explain it naturally, therefore make up a new ontology isn't evidence. It's always going to be better to say it can be explained as an unknown kind of stuff we already know about, rather than make up an entirely new unsupported ontology and then say this new unsupported ontology can explain the thing. It's always going to be better, infinitely, to base it off of combinations of known things that we have reason to believe are not just imaginary, rather than making up an imaginary thing, which we don't have any reason to think is not imaginary, and then to say it did it. So, argument from ignorance fallacy number 2.
So it's reasonable to believe that complex organic life originated supernaturalistically. And so we have some resources here. There's a classic book, Thaxton, Bradley, and Olson's The Mystery of Life's Origin, which is dated, and Meyer's
It's a mystery, therefore God did it. God of the gaps.
signature in a cell, in some respects, is an intended update of
Stephen Meyer's debunked model that has been proven mathematically to not work because it conflates 2 different kinds of complexity and literally has mathematical errors that prove his own theory wrong. That Stephen Meyer's, like, oops.
Mystery of Life's Origin. And so there you go. All right, we have Hugh Chandler's divine intervention argument. Now for this, you need to sort of begin by imagining Earth before there was life. Now you can run the argument. So just imagine Earth, no life.
Okay.
And now let's think. Given that God intervenes to produce life on Earth.
Well, this seems like a strange premise to start with. If your conclusion is something like God exists, and you're going to start with the premise God did something, well, I mean, that kind of begs the question, doesn't it? Like, God did something. Conclusion, God exists. Like, well, step 1, verify God actually did something. So, given that God intervenes to produce life on Earth, well, can you demonstrate that? Because that's, again, going against all of the science, all of the progress in biology. You're just saying magic for magic's sake. There is no chance that there is no chance at all that there will be no life on Earth. This is a confusing sentence. Okay, so if his argument is that given God's nature, he will necessarily produce life if what they assume God is to be correct. The probability of the conjunct, God intervenes to produce life on Earth and life does not occur on Earth, is 0. So literally all he's saying is, if God produced life, then there would not be life. Wow. Stunning. That is a stunning first premise. If God did not produce, if God produced potatoes, then potatoes would not exist. Genius.
Earth. There is no chance at all that there will be no life on Earth. The probability of the conjunct God intervenes to produce life on Earth and life does not occur is 0. Okay, that seems true. 2, if God does not intervene to produce life on Earth, the probability that life will occur here is very low.
Begging the question, like how did you come to that conclusion? Maybe it's 1. Maybe like necessitarianism is true, and the universe will necessarily produce life. So that's again kind of an argument from ignorance. It's probably going to be like, given what we currently know about the laws of physics, life being a result of natural processes is very low because of all the different universes we can imagine being produced by our laws of physics. Most of them would not have life, or something along those lines. Problem is again, I addressed this in the previous video, is that if you're comparing the probability of a life-permitting universe giving our known laws of physics versus your particular imagined God, it's like comparing all kinds of flowers to one kind of tree. It's like if you're asking, what is the probability that sakura trees will have pink flowers? Well, it's 1. Sakura trees have pink flowers. What is the probability that a flower will have pink flowers? Well, it's pretty low. Most flowers don't have pink flowers, except for like some kinds of roses and orchids and things. So the probability of any given flower producing pink petals is very, very low. The probability of a sakura tree producing pink petals is very, very high. It's 100% essentially, unless it dies. But this isn't a fair comparison, because what you want to compare is all kinds of trees to all kinds of flowers. What is the probability of any kind of tree producing pink petals versus any kind of flower producing pink petals? And this applies to the God argument, because if you're comparing all known kinds of naturalism, just natural laws of physics, and contrasting that to a particular kind of an idea of a God, then it's like comparing all kinds of flowers to one kind of tree. The truth is, there's a kind of God for every particular kind of universe. So there could be a God who only wants black holes. And so there's a universe of just black holes. God would want that. Or a universe of just neutron stars, or just planets with no life, or just stars, or whatever. So for every different variation of all the different possible ways the universe could be, there is a God who could potentially want that universe. So the probability of a life-permitting universe under a God is at the very least the exact same as the probability of a life-permitting universe under a natural universe as we know it. It's actually worse because there's infinitely many variations of a God and what it could potentially want and not want. So this argument actually works against a God because the probabilities are at the best the same and at worst significantly lower that a life-permitting universe will occur if a God exists than if just natural laws exist. Because you have to compare all possible combinations of physical laws to all possible combinations of God's properties. And this is where the theists beg the question, like, oh no, God can only have one possible set of qualities or he's not the greatest possible being because they've made up this silly arbitrary label of the greatest possible. And so there's only one way God could be. Well, we can just say there's only one way the universe could be. It's called necessitarianism. And therefore it would necessarily produce life and you get the exact same probability either way. So their own argument is self-defeating because either there is a necessitarian kind of a thing where God has one way it could be, or the universe could have one way it could be, or there's a variety of ways the universe could be, and there's a variety of ways God could be, one for each way the universe could be. So necessarily you get the exact same result, and this argument fails to indicate a God. In fact, it works better against a God.
3. It is just as reasonable to bet that God will intervene to produce life on Earth as that he won't. The subjective probability here is around 50-50.
That would be wrong. That would mean that 50% of all gods would create life and 50% of all gods would not create life, which is incorrect. The vast majority of gods would not create life because we can say for each possible way the universe could be, there could be a possible God to want it. So the probability a God would create life is actually smaller than the probability of it being produced by universe forces.
Let's just take that for argument. Pretty conservative assumption there. But there will be life on Earth. We know that because there is life on Earth.
Thank you for the super chat, Cosmic. Appreciate it.
So it's very likely that God will intervene to produce life on Earth. It's a probability argument for God's
And it fails.
producing life on Earth.
Yeah,
interesting argument.
No, it's not. There's nothing interesting about this argument.
And you can find this defended in Faith and Philosophy.
Nice.
It's interesting because it's a purely philosophical argument.
And it's purely wrong too.
For the origin of life, for the theistic origin of life, it doesn't depend on any empirical science. Okay, so design and biology, we have organic structures. Well, here let me just bust some myths about Hume and Paley. I was taught almost all introduction to philosophy texts. They treat the design argument before Hume, and then they present Hume as just demolishing Paley's design argument.
He did.
But in fact, Hume wrote after Paley, not before. That's how they present. Hume wrote after Paley, not before. But in fact, Paley wrote before Hume. After Hume, in cognizance of what Hume had written. So he developed his design argument, having already read Hume's criticisms.
Yes, so silly philosophers have debunked arguments like the existence of God. We've proven that all their arguments are debunked. And then they rephrase the same argument in a new way, thinking it does something new, and it's already been debunked. Like, yes, it doesn't matter if Paley literally wrote his argument after Hume, knowing Hume. He's still wrong. Hume already debunked it. Paley would just disagreed and was wrong.
So this idea that Hume read Paley and refuted Paley, which is how it's always presented, is just totally mistaken. So there's this sort of vulgar version.
That's right. He did one better. He debunked Paley before Paley even wrote anything because he had already debunked the design argument, and Paley just wrote it afterwards and was still wrong.
Version of Paley's design argument, which is culled from the opening chapters of his book on natural theology, which they present it as an analogical argument. It'll go like this: some things in nature resemble human artifacts. 2, human artifacts are the product of intentional design. 3, so we should infer that things in nature that resemble human artifacts are also products of intentional design. If there are things in nature that are the products of intentional design, God exists, so God exists. And as an analogical arguments in general are pretty weak, so it's not difficult to poke a lot of holes in this, as Hume, or at least as you can gather that Hume does. But what more careful scholars on Paley's design argument have pointed out is that a more faithful version of Paley's argument isn't really analogical, it's deductive. And it would go like this: if X is design-like, then X can only be the product of intentional design.
Okay, so this is a problem right here. If it's design-like, mean it resembles design, it looks like it's designed, then X can only be the product of intentional design. Now let's see if this premise holds true. What's the thing called again? I forgot. Seen faces in trees. Oh wait, no. Images. Yes, see here. Yep. So if it looks designed, what was this argument again? If it has design-like qualities, it can't be the product of not design. But this is Jesus dog butt. Clearly, something having the appearance of design doesn't mean it's designed. There's that thing, I forget what it's called, where you see those. Isaac. What is it called? Seen human things. Seen human features in things. Is called inanimate objects. Pareidolia. Pareidolia is the thing where you can see design-like things, or what you would assume to be designed, in non-designed objects. So you see it as being human or whatever. So this idea that it was design-like. If X is design-like means you think it looks designed. That's what that means. It design-like. If X is design-like, it's you think it looks designed. Then it is not possible for it not to be designed. What a stupid argument! Like how can you be so dumb? How can you be so dumb to think you think it looks designed, therefore it can't necessarily be anything but not designed? Like that's just begging the question. It's like, I think it's designed, therefore it can't be anything but designed. Good precept.
And some things in nature are design-like, so those things are products of intentional design. And a contemporary version, a defense of Paley would be Michael Behe style arguments from irreducibly
wow.
complex organisms.
All right, let's just keep chugging along. We're on to Proust's analogical design argument.
Okay, so Proust has this argument: DNA is like an intentionally designed computer program.
The dog butt is very much like Jesus.
Intentionally designed computer programs have intelligent designers.
Jesus has a God. Jesus was created by God.
So if DNA is like an intentionally designed computer program, it too probably has.
If Jesus dog butt is a Jesus, then it must have a God. So it's probably the case that there is a God of the Jesus dog butt.
Intelligent designer. So DNA probably has an intelligent designer.
Conclusion: there is a God but Jesus. Or Jesus but God. There is a Jesus but God. So it's an entire view of Christianity 2.0, where Jesus has come back in the reincarnation of a dog and God did it. So exact same argument here.
And he's got a lot of interesting arguments in defense of this.
Actually, I guess I should take a serious look at this. So DNA is like an intentional design computer program. No, it's not. It's not. It's not in any way like an intentionally designed computer program, because most of it's junk. Most of it is not useful. It's a product of random chance and mutation, which we can literally observe, which doesn't happen in computer codes. No intentionally designed computer code does that, or very few of them do. all DNA is mostly much more analogous to a randomly natural process. So it's false. So premise 1 is false. Unless, because I guess you could take it in the most vague, ambiguous sense, like a potato is like a person in that it both has DNA or whatever. Like could just mean anything you want. So this is literally an argument from analogy. Oh, DNA is like X. Okay. Google argument from analogy examples. Those are pretty good. Argument from analogy fallacy examples. Argument from analogy. To argue by analogy is to argue that because two things are similar, what is true of one is also true of the other. Thank you for the super chat, Jacob. Appreciate it. Some examples. There might be life on Europa because it has an atmosphere that contains oxygen, just like Earth. Fair. What is the temperature on Europa? Europa. Moon on Jupiter has a temperature of temperature 100. So the equator never rises above minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. So to say that Europa is like Earth, therefore it's reasonable to infer that Europa has life, is the same kind of argument from analogy that Pruss's analogical design argument fails for. Hey, argument from analogy failures.
Ooh. So if DNA is like an intentionally designed computer program, it too probably has an intelligent designer. So DNA probably has an intelligent designer. And he's got a lot of interesting arguments in defense of this argument.
No, none of them are interesting.
Design and biology, and here we have information. Information here just means specified complexity, a complex.
Specified complexity is debunked. Specified complexity. Specified complexity. Sheffield. Whoops. Specified complexity. Freaking autocorrect. Specified complexity. Specified complexity. Specified complexity is a gracious term. Oops. Let's see what we got here. Criticism. The soundness of Dembski's concepts of specified complexity and the validity of the arguments based on the concept are widely disputed. Thank you, long line of Vidius, for subscribing. A frequent criticism is that Dembski has used the term complexity, information, and improbability interchangeably. The number measures are properties of these things different times. So complexity measures how hard it is to describe an object, such as its bit string. Information is how much uncertainty about the state of an object is reduced by knowing the state of another object or system. And improbability measures how unlikely an event is given a probability distribution. So he's conflating three terms which he uses interchangeably into his equations, which are totally made up. So I think we can find specified complexity getting debunked somewhere. Pseudo. No pseudoscience. CSUD. No. Specified complexity. Specified complexity, as originally defined by Laszlo Orgel, is precisely what Darwinian evolution is supposed to create. So, specified complexity is a product of evolution. Oops. Critics maintain that Dembski uses complex as the most people would as absurdly improbable. And the argument is circular.
Arrangement or a pattern that has function or that has meaning, okay? And the argument would go, information is inherent to the building blocks of life. So it's not like Proust said that there's something like information. No, this argument says no, there is information inherent to the building blocks of life. Information is the product of intelligence. If information is
So premise 2 is false in physics for sure. Like information is definitely not the product of intelligence, and information is false. It's false mathematically. Shannon information theory. Information is a product of any complex. What is it? Stochastic system. Information is the product of a stochastic system in Shannon information theory. Paper 1958, 48. Shannon information theory. Information is a product of a stochastic system. Theory. I can't find the paper. Where? I know it. I have it saved somewhere. I don't remember where though. The information product of a stochastic system, which isn't a mind. So, if information is a product of a stochastic system, not intelligence, then premise 2 debunked. Information is fundamental in physics, certain physics theories, which isn't intelligence. So premise 2 is false, debunked. So this is why arguments aren't evidence, because you just saying by definitions of things you've made up which don't correspond to reality. You actually have to demonstrate the premises are true with science, which they're proven false with science.
Is inherent to the building blocks of life, then the building blocks of life themselves are the byproduct of intelligence. So the building blocks of life are the byproduct of intelligence. And building blocks would be things like genes expressions, proteins, DNA, and so forth. And, this is a pretty widely held belief. Bill Gates actually is often quoted as saying DNA is like a software program, only it's one that's infinitely more complex than even the most complex software programs that we have. So it's pretty much taken for granted that DNA is.
Thank you, Isaac.
Might not just be like information; it is information.
This is actually a lot of fun because I'm more interested in cosmological arguments and even ontological arguments. So it's fun to see some of these from biology, as the way that they've been developed for God's existence. It's interesting to me. I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah. I have some other notes here, but we'll skip those. Let's go to Tenet's argument from cosmic teleology. And Tenet, F.R. Tenet, he was the Richard Swinburne.
Did I make an argument to debunk his argument? No, I did not make an argument to debunk his argument. I just proved one of the premises was false.
Of the early 20th century. His work is just incredible. And he, in many ways, his arguments foreshadow or
does he actually do work, or is he just making up definitional arguments that aren't evidence? Because if he doesn't actually do any real work, then it can't be incredible. It's just making up some word arguments.
Anticipates almost all of Swinburne's arguments. So we have one: the universe is conspicuously suitable for intelligent moral beings in many ways, and he has these 6 different ways.
This sounds like word games. It sounds like he's making up some magical word games. Conspicuously suitable seems like an arbitrary label that he's saying. Puddle analogy. Oh, this hole seems very nice. It fits me so nicely. A puddle.
Ways. There's just one universe with necessary ingredients for life. Those ingredients have come together, at least in one place on Earth, to make an environment not just habitable, but conducive to flourishing.
Life definitely isn't flourishing. It's fighting desperately to survive. It's definitely not flourishing.
Those world's flourishing inhabitants find the world intelligible.
No, I'm not using arguments to debunk arguments. I'm disproving the premises in their own arguments. So if one of their arguments is false, then the argument is false. I don't need to make an argument for it. It's not an argument. It's just showing that the premise is false.
Being intelligible, they also find it beautiful. And all of these facts together suggest the unfolding of a plan behind which there is purposive intelligence.
Suggest, you mean you imagine it to be the case. So it doesn't actually suggest anything. It's just you imagine it to be the case. And you imagine it to be the case, you want to be evidence. Therefore, you take your imagination of something and count it as evidence.
So all these facts are all facts about the universe, which make it conspicuously suitable for intelligent moral beings. So, two, if the universe is conspicuously suitable for intelligent moral beings in many ways, then it should be regarded as a theater for the lives of intelligent moral agents designed by God. So, the universe should be regarded as a theater for the lives of intelligent moral agents designed by God.
You imagine it's designed for humans and can only be designed for humans, or is most likely designed for humans. Because you imagine it's most likely designed for humans, it should be designed for humans, therefore it's designed for humans. Puddle analogy debunked.
And the other remarkable thing about this argument is he was ahead of his time in that it presupposes compatibility with evolution. Almost no one prior to Tenet was making design arguments that presuppose compatibility with evolution.
Yes, that's because after Darwin discovered evolution, theists had to change their entire argument because they realized their God was false, and so they had to move the God of the gaps back a stage and say, well, what explains evolution? God did it. And then once we solve abiogenesis, then you're going to have to explain, well, how did abiogenesis and the physics happen? God did it. It's not a God of gaps.
So there you go.
I'm streaming 2 separate videos at the same time. What? It's possible, actually. I think just one of them is supposed to be off, but it's just not. Let's see. Let's find that out. Streaming 2 videos at the same time. So, TJump, you believe in your imagination that nothing created everything? No one in physics, no atheist thinks nothing created something. No one thinks that. Reality has always existed and has never not existed. So no, there's nothing creating something. Not in any atheistic worldview.
Fine-tuning arguments. So we have fundamental constants and laws of the universe.
Yeah. Now these design arguments I'm way more familiar with.
Yeah.
Design arguments from biology I'm way less familiar.
So we have examples of the fundamental constants and laws of the universe. Find structure constant, electromagnetic interaction, alpha, gravitation, the weak nuclear force, proton electron mass ratio, density, and interaction.
All right, let's see here. Yeah, I'm streaming 2 videos at the same time. That is quite annoying. I don't know how that happened. How did that happen? Live. It shows both of them. That's annoying. All right, let's take this guy. I want to edit. Cancel. Delete forever. Let's see if that works. Hopefully that should fix it. I hope. Yeah, that's a weird glitch. Streaming 2 videos at the same time. I don't know how that happened. One of them has correct punctuation and the other one doesn't. That's phenomenal. Videos. Now it should be fixed. Now there should only be one, I hope. Check that. Who was it who mentioned that? Whoever was. Check that to make sure there's only one of them now. Ash, you're on Twitch. You can watch it on Twitch. Are you watching on YouTube? I guess that's fine, but whatever.
Speed of the.
But like, Ash, can you see if there should be another one there? Like, right? You can find the other one, right?
Expansion of the universe. We have examples of fine tuning, which I'm sure most of your viewers will be very familiar with. So maybe it'd be better, rather than to go through these examples, they can just pause it later and look at them.
Okay, let's pause it later and look at them. So, fine-tuning argument fails. I've debunked the fine-tuning argument with the experts in fine-tuning for theists. If you want to say that some particular set of physical laws are a result of fine tuning, then you have to already have some kind of evidence of the nature of the fine tuner, the designer. And if you have some evidence of the designer, then you don't need the fine tuning. The fine tuning would only be evidence if you already had some independent source of evidence to indicate the designer existed. And then if you knew the designer existed, you could then infer, because I know this designer exists and makes these kinds of things, then we can look at the universe and say, oh, this is one of the things that the God made. And I covered this with Robin Collins. Robin Collins, one of the world's leading theist experts in fine tuning. I literally asked him the question, does anything in physics indicate design? So all these things he's listing, these are all physical constants. Does anything in physics indicate design? He's like, no. It's only the physics plus a philosophical argument. I'll find the clip. Find the clip, because it's a good clip. It's one of my favorite clips. Search Robin Collins. This is the clip. Doink. Fair to say that if you don't include the philosophical argument and you just go based off of the physics, like combinations of principles, particles, laws in the field of physics, that doesn't support design at all. It is only supported when you add the philosophical argument of like morality to the physics.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think the fine tuning supports a generic design hypothesis. They're just some designer. I think if you just say some designer, that gives you no reason to think the designer would produce this kind of universes versus all others. Just like any improbable event, if you allow that, then any improbable event you could have supporting a design hypothesis. So no, I don't think that will work. I think you have to have a reason that's somehow out of the and not just simply ascribed to the nature, that comes out of something deeper in the nature of your postulate.
So what that means is that even given all of these things that he's listing on the page, none of that is evidence of a God. None of this is evidence of fine tuning. The only way any of that could be evidence of fine tuning is if you had some kind of independent basis of evidence or to conclude there is this designer thingy, and this designer thingy has these properties to produce these constants. So if we had evidence of a God outside of physics, we could chat with God, talk to him, whatever, and we knew his nature and he said that he was going to make these constants or whatever, then we discovered these constants. Yeah, that would be evidence, but we haven't. Right now they're just saying, I believe my invisible sky daddy has these properties, and in these properties he would create this fine-tuning stuff right here. That's all they're saying. They assume their God has the properties to create this universe. We see this universe, therefore they're God. So none of this in physics is evidence of God at all, until you get some independent basis of evidence to indicate that your sky daddy has the properties to make these things, which is why no one in physics takes the God hypothesis seriously. It's not something any physicist thinks is correct. All of the models in physics are like extra physical stuff. So string theory, many worlds, dipole moment, pilot wave theory, multiverse, no God. God hypothesis not taken seriously in physics.
Good idea.
And we have several different ways we could run a fine-tuning argument based on this data. One would be by elimination. The fine-tuning of the universe is either due to chance, physical necessity, or design.
Design is a kind of necessity.
It's not due to either chance or necessity, so it's due to design.
Actually, all the evidence indicates it's either chance or necessity. It has to be one of those two. It can't be not one of those two. Design is a kind of necessity. Thank you for the super chat, Ryan Lyon. That rhymes. I like it. You're the greatest, TJ, but will you date Godless Girl? For a sufficient amount of money, I would date Godless Girl. I would not have physical relations with her because, it would take a significant more amount of money for that. I think she offered me like 20 grand or something at some point. That is not a sufficient amount of money. Not a sufficient amount.
And that, of course, is Craig's favored way of formulating the argument, which
there's
got
actually
from...
some. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, say what you were going to say, and then I'll add.
Yeah,
something.
well, he got that way of formulating it from William Dembski's book, The Design Inference.
Taken from Dembski, not a good start. Like let's take from people who have been proven to be pseudoscientists and their entire ideology is debunked as mathematically flawed, and use those as a basis of an argument. not a great start.
I was just going to say that this version actually has some benefits that not many people know about. And so there's one in particular I'm thinking about right now, which is in the other versions, like you see from Robin Collins and even I think Luke Barnes might be susceptible to this, is that there's this question in the problem of evil literature about skeptical theism. So skeptical theism is this idea that we can't really be confident about what God would do in this world in terms of like what he would allow, what kind of horrendous evils he would allow and whatnot. So there's this question of like, how much do we really know about what God would intend or would do? And so this actually, if we think about that response to the problem of evil in terms of a response to these kind of design arguments, which seem to look at what God is intending to do with nature, then it would seem to actually cut both ways. So it would make us skeptical about these arguments from evil, but then it would also seem to make us skeptical about these arguments from design because we're not really sure what God's intentions are. But I wanted to, the reason why I'm even bringing this out and talking about this is because this version, I studied this a couple years back, and I discovered that this version by Craig is kind of clever because it doesn't actually involve that at all. It just says fine-tuning of the universe is either due to chance, physical necessity, or design. Fine-tuning is not due to either chance or physical necessity, so fine-tuning is due to design. So what's sort of interesting about this version of the fine-tuning argument is that it avoids all those types of concerns, which is interesting. And it's very, Craig is very careful when he formulates his arguments because this is completely compatible with his views on the problem of evil and what he thinks we can or can't know about God's desires. So I just wanted to point that out.
So,
it's kind of a side point.
Yeah, if we compare that to the other formulations, which all have as a central.
Well, none of that matters. So like, I think capturing Christianity's point here is that many of the versions of the design argument fail because there's multiple different ways that God could potentially design the universe, and so unless you have a particular kind of evidence of a particular kind of a God, then you can't say that this was designed by God because anything could have been designed by God because any way God's nature could be. And that does apply to all of them. It also applies to William Lane Craig's, to literally every version of the design argument. It's necessity. It's a necessary aspect of any design argument, like even design in archaeology or cars or whatever. In order for something to count as design, you must know something about the designer first. So that applies to all design arguments necessarily.
Point that given that the universe permits the existence of intelligent, conscious agents, despite how easily it might not have, that's
Flux Bay. You should do a breakdown of Brian Holdsworth's channel. Add it to, like, I have on my Discord, I have a vids you want debunked section. If you add the vids there, give me links, I'll go through them all eventually. I'm like halfway through right now, so just feel free to add those. Mannerite, what is randomness? Randomness is a thing. Randomness is, if you go to physics, the physics polls actually say that randomness is a true fundamental thing. Actually, that's a really interesting point, so I should probably show that to people. Physics, fundamental attitudes, snapshot, fundamental attitudes towards physics, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. Good question. So I'll show this. Fundamental attitudes towards physics. Control F, random. God, Control F. Find random. Randomness right there. So right here it says question 1. Can I zoom in so you guys can see this? What is your opinion on the randomness of individual quantum events, such as the decay of radioactive atoms? The randomness is only apparent. There is a hidden determinism. Randomness is irreducible, 48%. Randomness is a fundamental concept in nature, 64%. So in physics, this paper is a fundamental snapshot towards quantum mechanics, studies in modern physics. The consensus right now is that randomness is itself a fundamental thing that exists in the universe.
That significantly raises the probability of theism being true.
Bayes epistemology fails, problem of the priors.
True. And so the first one is just a quick Bayes argument. The probability that we have the evidence of fine-tuning, given our background knowledge, K, and theism is false, is very low. the probability that we have this evidence, if theism is true, is very high. So that means that the probability that theism is true is much more likely than its probability that it's not being true, given the evidence.
So the problem with Bayes epistemology is it's mostly a word game that's false. So in Bayes epistemology, something is evidence if the thing occurring if my hypothesis is true is higher than if my hypothesis is not true and no other variables are considered, then it's evidence. So for example, if you have a gold brick in your basement, the fact that leprechauns like gold bricks means, and would put a gold brick in your basement, means that that gold brick in your basement is evidence of leprechauns. So if the thing your hypothesis posits would do X and you see X, that's evidence of your hypothesis. This is called, it's exactly right, Alex Gross. Posterior probability relies on several arguments destroying assumptions. That's right. So this is a posterior probability saying that if my, like we see X, we see there's a gold brick and leprechauns explain gold bricks. Therefore, this gold brick is evidence of a leprechaun. Post hoc, ergo proctor hoc fallacy. For it to really count as evidence, you need novel prediction to say, here is something we don't know yet, and I expect to see this thing we don't know yet. And if that happens, then you have real evidence. But Bayesian epistemology is just essentially a way for theists to try and sneak in post hoc reasoning, which is false. So the whole problem here is that it works in the same way as my tree and flower analogy. Like if you say, we're going to start with, this is a second problem. The second problem with this Bayesian reasoning is the fact that if you compare all possible flowers to one kind of tree and say which is more likely to be pink, and you compare it to a sakura tree, well then obviously the chance of a sakura tree having pink petals is 100%. The chance of any random flower having pink petals is low. Therefore, if you select between these two options, sakura tree with pink or any given flower is pink, the sakura tree is more likely to have pink flowers than just any random flower. However, if you compare all trees to all flowers, you get a different result. So this is what the theists are doing there. It's called cherry picking. They're cherry picking a single kind of an idea of a God, which they think is one that would create the universe. Therefore, is it more likely that a God they think would create the universe, or that random forces would create the universe? Like, well, obviously, just like the sakura tree is more likely to be pink than any given flower, a God who would necessarily create the universe is more likely to create the universe than random forces. But if you compare all possible gods to all possible ways the universe could be, God loses. So, like, for every possible variation of the way the universe could be, there is a possible God who could want the universe to be that way. So if you compare all possible gods to all possible ways the universe could be, there are more possible gods that would not create a life-permitting universe than universes that would not be life-permitting. Therefore, if you want to make this argument actually work and not be gibberish mathematically false, you have to compare all flowers to all trees, not all flowers to one particular kind of a tree. Likewise, you have to compare all possible natural worlds to all possible kinds of gods, not compare all possible natural worlds with one particular God. It's cherry picking. So this argument, Bayes epistemology always, pretty much their uses always have this fallacy in it that they just assume their particular kind of a God and think the others are false, which is cherry picking further and weights the argument in their favor, like saying, oh, there's one particular kind of a tree, which is a sakura tree, and that's the only one. There's only one tree. The sakura tree has pink petals. Therefore, if we're comparing trees to flowers, there's only one kind of tree, and it's a pink flower tree, and so the probability of a pink flower tree is 100%. It's a really dumb argument.
Probability of theism being true given the evidence is high. And alternatively,
right, so I was just going to say we're at another 10. So is it time or should we wait?
Go ahead, because there are a handful of design arguments to get to yet.
Okay.
Well, let's finish Collins. Let's finish Collins.
I have no idea
he likes to simplify it to just the following: the probability that we have the evidence for fine tuning given the naturalistic. I have a typo here. K should be E. No, I'm sorry. K's right. K is the universe permits the existence of embodied conscious agents. So
I'm telling you,
given
man,
that,
this mental exhaustion is setting in. It is setting in.
I know, me too.
I'm like,
so that is so the probability that the universe permits the existence of embodied conscious agents, given naturalism and there's only one universe, is very, very low. It's much lower than 1. But it's not unlikely given theism, so the evidence confirms theism over naturalism.
So this is the same fallacy I mentioned before, cherry picking. If you assume there is one kind of a God, and that one kind of a God would create a natural permitting universe, and that one kind of a God exists, then it would produce a natural universe that allows for life. However, if you assume there's one kind of natural realistic universe and it necessarily produce life, you get the exact same probability. This is why it's fallacious to compare all possible kinds of known variations of the laws of physics to one possible kind of imagined God, when what you should be comparing is all possible kinds of known physical laws with all possible kinds of God. And then you get what I just talked about. The probability is worse for a God. So again, they're just cherry picking their own favored kind of a God and omitting the possibility that, oh wait, every different kind of a universe can have a God that wants exactly that kind of universe. So necessarily the probability is going to be worse for God, or exactly the same at best.
All right, so go ahead.
How am I doing today? Andrews, I'm doing really good. My depression has still been cured, and I've been getting happier and happier recently. I've been doing really good. I want to start my own religion. I want to start the atheist religion, get a building, church. I want to build an atheist church. I don't want to build, I want to buy a church and just relabel it with atheist church, get a streaming studio, do like the atheist experience thing, get a call-in show, get a bunch of atheists to come up here, Minnesota, host call-in shows, build a big community like the atheist experience. Absolutely. I'm doing really good. So thanks for asking. Tracy Evans, thank you for the super chat. Is Richard Carey's use of Bayesian analysis an honest use of the system? Are you familiar with his work? How about interviewing him? I mean, it's more honest than the theist version. So Richard Carrier's view is more honest than the theist version, and the mythicist position is very, it's significantly more supported than theism. So taking the mythicist position and trying to justify that with Bayesian epistemology is a significantly more intellectually honest thing to do than theism is, for sure. I haven't looked specifically into his priors, so I don't know exactly if it's perfect, but when I did look into his work, it did seem reasonable. Like, all his arguments seem very good, very reasonable as far as I can tell. So it seems like a logical conclusion. I think the only problem with Richard Carey's work is that in history, the bar for saying someone existed is very, very, very low. Like, the standard in history for an existing person is extremely low. And so I think that Carrier might be taking too much of a critical approach to a field that doesn't allow for that. Like, if we took that critical an approach, we could omit most of the people in history. Like, there just isn't strong evidence for historical people existing. So I think that would be Richard Carrier's greatest flaw, is that he's applying too strong an epistemic rule to a field which just can't handle that. There's just not enough strong evidence in that field to delineate existing and non-existing people at the level Richard Carrier is asking for. But yeah, I think his use of Bayesian epistemology is far more honest than the theist use of Bayesian epistemology.
Do your 10 push-ups.
Have we?
Oh, and would I invite him on? I actually did invite him on because I wanted to talk about mysticism for a while back. But he wanted me to read a bunch of his books and stuff, and I got some of them, and I was like too busy for it.
So does that exhaust Collins? I don't think
I've got one more from Collins, but go ahead.
Ed, you think the minions banned you from Discord? Not honest. Ed, if you want to, you can, if you're on my Patreon for the $5 Patreon level, you become a mod on the Discord, and they can't kick you anymore. So Ed, if you want, you can just sub to my Patreon at $5 and you'll be able to rejoin the Discord. Made by Jim Bob. Any argument against the existence of God can be used against the existence of truth. No physical evidence exists for either. Why have faith in truth? I'm not sure I follow that, Bob. Like, mm, I mean, because truth is just a description. Does a sentence correspond to reality? So I don't think it would be the same because we don't like. I think truth exists as in a description, or so it doesn't exist outside of sentences. Exist in sentences. So like, is the table true? Yeah, per month. So like, if you ask, is the table true? Like, no, there's no the truth isn't contained in a table. Or is the TV true? No, the TV is not true. Is the world true? No, the world is not true. Truth does not exist in objects. Truth is a property of sentences. So if you say, does the TV exist? That sentence is true. The TV is not true. Truth does not exist in the TV. It exists in the sentence. Genius. Wait, you got kicked? Oh yeah, you got back on. You're good, Genius. Yeah, so they can do it, but I'll get you back on. So, yeah, so truth doesn't exist in objects; it exists in sentences. Truth does not exist in the TV. The sentence that says the TV exists, truth exists in that sentence because truth is a property of sentences to describe whether or not they correspond to reality. So truth doesn't exist anywhere in the universe. It's just whether or not the sentence you say describes reality. So I don't know how anything that would be considered evidence of a God would work in that sense to work against truth.
Okay. You're eager. You're like eager to see me do these. Okay.
I want to get out. Yeah,
and
I
this
want to
time,
get you working out here.
Thank you. And also, this time you don't have to be so quiet, so people don't just like awkwardly listen to my breathing.
Well, I would count, but I can't. I can hardly see your shoulders.
You can't see me. Yeah. Oh, could you see it when I was
briefly?
This out of the way.
I like that shirt.
So
that's
a
nice shirt.
Like when I come. Okay.
Yeah, a little bit.
Maybe if I move that out of the way. Okay.
Is he doing push-ups?
2, there we see it. 4, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Numbers, 8, not this
2.
guy's strong suit.
You like for sure made me lose my spot. I have no idea how many I did just then.
Hey, you asked.
Yeah.
All right. Idea. Catch your breath. And this next argument from Collins is really cool. It's the fine-tuning for discoverability. Okay, so.
Ooh, it's a really cool argument, guys. Let's hear the really cool argument.
The idea is that of all the possible values fundamental physical constants could assume, there's a tiny range that permit the existence of embodied conscious agents. And we can call that the anthropic range, okay?
While you're talking, I've got to go get some more water. So, but everyone can hear you. Don't worry about it.
Got it. Now, within the anthropic range, there's an even tinier range of values that the physical constants could assume that would make the universe optimal for scientific discovery and investigation. And he calls this the discoverability optimality range.
So that's all true. What he said there is true, that there is, of all the different possible variations of the combinations of physics, ones with embodied minds is low. Correct. And the embodied minds having the ability to do science is even lower. So yes, having a combination of physics that allow for minds and allow for minds to do science is very low. Okay. Now let's see how he fails to try and understand how this indicates God.
And so an example would be the universe has relatively low entropy all throughout, but embodied
Hey Ryan, how's it going?
Conscious agents need only a relatively small regional pocket of low entropy in order to exist. So the universe doesn't have to have low entropy all throughout for us to exist. Yet the general low entropy of the universe all throughout makes the universe optimal for observational discoveries in astrophysics and cosmology. So examples like that give Collins a new argument, a new kind of fine-tuning argument. It would go like this. The values of certain physical constants fall within the discoverability optimality range within the anthropic range.
Lots of silly words that don't indicate anything. He's saying that the exact same thing all the previous arguments were saying. That, oh, if there's a God, a sky daddy who wants to create beings like us, then if there's a Sky Daddy that likes to create beings like us, it explains why there's beings like us a lot better than if randomness is the only thing.
If naturalism is true, it is enormously improbable that the values of certain physical constants would fall within the discoverability optimality range, within the anthropic range. But if theism is true, it's not at all improbable that the values of certain physical constants would fall within the discoverability optimality range. So the values of certain physical constants would fall within this discoverability optimality range within the anthropic range strongly confirms theism over naturalism. The main idea is just being that, look, God didn't just create a universe that was minimally sufficient for our existence. There seem to be features of the universe that are perks, I guess, that they're not just necessary. There are things on top of what's necessary that make it very convenient.
So his argument here is that not only do we exist in a universe that has life and brains and stuff, but the life and brains and stuff can do things like science. And that's even harder than just a universe with life and brains and stuff, but one that has life and brains and can do science. And this is evidence of God. Not at all. Exact same fallacy, exact same problem as all the other previous arguments, which are all the same arguments. It's just saying that, oh, look, if we assume Sky Daddy who wants us to do this stuff and this stuff exists, therefore Sky Daddy. But again, if you compare all possible Sky Daddies with all possible universes, the probabilities work out to be the same. So assuming one particular kind of Sky Daddy doesn't actually get you evidence. Just like assuming one particular combination of laws of physics is necessary doesn't explain that that's really the way it is. Also, at least there's evidence for physical laws. There's no evidence of a God, so that would still be preferred to a God, but it doesn't actually count as evidence.
To do science and to observe the world and so forth.
Okay, and then I've already got this pulled up actually here. Fine-tuning for discoverability. It's in the 24 or so arguments for God that we're just completely one-upping in this stream. So
So the next argument, maybe we don't need to infer design at all. Biologists themselves say organisms appear or look designed. Not that we're inferring that they're designed, but that's just how they appear.
Oh my God, they're gonna make me pull up the Jesus butt dog again, because they think that if it appears that way, therefore it's justifiably that way.
So some philosophers have argued that look, if X appears design-like, then X is justifiably taken to be the product of intentional design. Some things in nature do appear designed, so they're justifiably taken to be the products of design.
All right, terrible argument. This picture looks like an owl. Therefore, it must be an owl. Genius. Oh my God. Like if we just use theist arguments for everything, the world just seems like such a prettier place. This mountain looks like a troll. Therefore, this mountain is a troll. If it appears that way, it is that way. Theist Reasoning 101.
And so you have Richard Dawkins famously opening his book, The Blind Watchmaker, by defining biology as the...
Thank you, Jim Bob. Thank you for the super chat. The statement, truth is absolute, is true and does not describe observable reality. We assume many things to be true before we describe anything? What? Like, the statement, sentences can describe reality accurately. Like, yes, that's true. I don't know. Truth is absolute. I don't know what that means. I mean, I guess. Like, if sentences describe reality, I don't really know what truth is absolute means. I don't really think of truth as that way. I think that all true things describe reality, and so in that sense, truth is absolute. And then the things that don't describe reality are untrue, and so it absolutely refers to reality, but that's just definitional. So I don't think. I mean, we obviously assume things are in reality before we make sentences to describe reality. But reality existed before the truth did.
Study of complicated things that give.
Oh, Nick, I was going to do the dog butt picture, but I didn't want to get like repeat myself. I already put the dog butt picture on the screen, so I got to do something different. Keep things interesting. Also, that one guy was eating, so I don't want to make him spit on his screen. That'd be bad. I'd be liable for that probably.
The appearance of having been designed. And you have Crick saying that biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see is not designed, but rather evolved. We just, if you take the principle that, look, if how something appears is evidence of how it is, these things in nature appear designed, so that's evidence that they are designed. And you could run an argument from design in biology or from.
He literally just say, I've just made a parody of saying that. If it looks designed, it's designed. Well, if you do that, well, it's designed. He just verbatim stated my parody of his argument as his actual argument.
From the cosmos in general with this sort of reasoning.
I mean, thank you for granting that my parody was an accurate representation of your argument. It looks designed, therefore it's designed. If we grant that it looks that way, therefore it is that way, that's a great argument. Like, well, okay then.
Hello, welcome to Capturing Christianity. I've got Dr. Chad McIntosh with me today, where we're giving you 100 plus, this is about 150. No, I think it is exactly 150 arguments for God's existence. We have been working, and by we I mean you, Dr. McIntosh, you've been working on compiling this list of arguments.
That's right, Clout. So much of that comes down to, I can't understand it working in any other way, therefore I must be right. Correct. It's called an argument from ignorance. That is exactly correct.
For a long time, we've been working on this stream for it feels like months at this point.
Dr. Chad is such a Chad. That's such a Chad.
Point, and we were just talking about the fact that we could have even, been preparing for another month. Like there's so much to do and so much out there and so much to cover.
Yeah.
And this is also going to be
it felt like I was back in college cramming for an exam.
Haha, Trillion. I see what you did there. A big pile of arguments.
Yeah, and this is so just to set you guys up of what to expect today. If you're just starting this video and you're kind of like, okay, what's going to happen in this video? Basically, we're going to run through an overall outline of 150 arguments for God's existence. And then we're also going to provide resources on what you can do if you want to learn more about that argument. So this is going to be a very a kind of
about Jesus going to
Jesus!
chapel, singing star went across the sky. Is it your story? And actually, my OCD.
Cosmological doesn't indicate God. Ontological is just playing with definitions and false. Design is demonstrably false in physics. Morality is better explained without a God. Experiential. Anecdotal fallacy. Miracles proven false by science. Pragmatic. That's like, I'm guessing that's the Pascal's wager argument, which is proven false. Non-traditional. Metaphysical. I'm guessing that's kind of like nomenological, metaphysical, axiological. Those are all arguments for like logic and math and crap, which are provably false. Linguistics. Really? There's a linguistics argument for God here? Like that's stupid. Like words exist, therefore God exists. Anthropological. Humans exist. So you're literally using an anthropogenic fallacy as an argument for God. Humans exist. Something like humans created it. It's us, therefore God. Well, that seems dumb. Noological? I'm not sure. That's probably another mathematical logical argument. I'm betting.
Tendencies got the better of me, and I had to just start leaving arguments out, which bothers me. But I think 150, 155 or so is enough.
I wanted to say though that also like these arguments are not just like random arguments that you're finding on Facebook.
Yeah, they are. These are random arguments that you find on theist Facebook. They're pretty bad.
In random Facebook groups, these are peer-reviewed, published.
That's right.
Arguments that have been defended by some of the smartest people ever.
That goes to the point I was going to make is, it's hard to say what a good argument is. So if we have, I think
one that's supported by empirical evidence, that's what a good argument is. Pretty easy.
It's the very next slide. Consider this theistic argument. It's a novel argument. Let's call it the Dixie argument. Either my cat is named Lucifer or God exists. My cat is not named Lucifer, so God exists.
This is literally as good as every one of those arguments he just listed.
Okay, look, I think that's a sound argument for God's existence because I think both of the premises are true. I think God exists, and my cat is not named Lucifer. Her name is Dixie. The problem is that's not an argument that any rational person would take seriously. By contrast, all of the arguments that we'll look at are arguments that are taken seriously by rational people, professional philosophers with PhDs who have published these arguments in the highest tier journals of peer review. Okay, so just for get a handle on what is a good argument, let's just say an argument that a rational person can take seriously. Okay, so the list we're going to look at.
A good argument is an argument a rational person can take seriously. That doesn't sound like a very good definition of a good argument. People are too stupid. So it's saying that some person I consider rational could take this seriously. Does that mean that any valid argument would be rational? That's a bad explanation.
It's not exhaustive. There's some arbitrariness in how I categorize some of the arguments. One argument can be categorized under different categories. Most of the outlines are my own. I tried my best to keep them simple and accurate. I reached out to many of the philosophers who published these arguments to confirm that I've understood them correctly, and I heard back from most of them. I want to keep the presentations brief, which is risky. That's the biggest risk in this, because if you keep it brief, it runs the risk of someone just dismissing it. It's like, oh, that's a dumb argument or something like that.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, look, if you come up with an objection on the spot to one of these arguments, it's very likely that this objection is dealt with or wrestled with in the paper that we're going to be referencing, okay, in the publication the argument comes from. So this is more, you can think of this more as, like you said, an overview of the vast terrain of theistic arguments. This is not our endorsements of any of these arguments, and this is not an apologetic per se. This is not a cumulative case per se. Now, when I was sharing the link to this video, I saw a comment, the top comment on the right. It was by M. Jordan. It said this: "What's the point of this video? Over 98% are not good arguments for God. In my opinion, there's only like 3 good arguments for God, but those good ones still don't mean God exists." Now, I want to respond to that because it prefaces what we're doing here very nicely. What's the point of this video? Well, it's a semi-comprehensive survey of theistic arguments outlined as teasers, pointing to resources for you to go deeper on the arguments that pique your interest. Okay. That said, at the very end, I do want to play around with the numbers a bit, because a recent paper by Ted Poston called "The Argument from So Many Arguments" lays out, he gives a method for calculating the cumulative evidential force of many arguments put together. So what I want to do is give estimates on the force of these arguments at the end, where we can have bad arguments, which are just unsound. They have a false premise. We have weak arguments that are arguments that have premises that aren't obviously false, but don't obviously seem true either. Maybe they're just slightly more plausible than not. We have strong arguments, and so the conclusion is
it up by like,
and so the conclusion is there must, and so the conclusion is there
the arguments. It's already, given that it's already been 20 minutes. Let's go ahead and get into the the first one. So here is the screen. So we're going to start with cosmological arguments.
All right. Well, cosmological arguments are arguments for the conclusion that God is the ultimate cause, ground, or explanation of the universe, or all of contingent or dependent reality. And there's no better argument to start with than Aquinas' first way, the argument from the unmoved mover. So we have Aquinas' first way. Premise 1, some things are moved. 2, whatever is moved by another. 3, there cannot be an infinite series of movers, and so the conclusion is there must be an unmoved mover. And Aquinas' stock phrase was, "And this is what all men mean by God."
Yes, I was muted. Thank you. Thank you for that, people. Yeah, so I muted myself so I could get a drink. But yeah, so this argument is dumb. That's essentially what I said. This argument is dumb. But yeah, so to say that in more detail, what Aquinas said there, what everybody means by God, is not. That is not what everybody means by God. People do not mean an unmoved mover when they say God. People mean a non-physical mind that created the universe. That's what they mean when they say God. That's what the vast majority of people mean when they say God. And that is false. So we can say that there is a first mover, and the first mover was a quantum field. A quantum field is the most likely explanation of the first mover. And a quantum field does not have a mind, intentionality, consciousness, thoughts. It's just scientific quantum field, and that's it. That is the best explanation of what a first mover. Quantum field is the first mover, not a mind. So we can grant all of these arguments except that last little bit with that 3-word God thing is just completely wrong.
Now, important for understanding this argument and other arguments which reject an infinite series is the distinction between a series ordered per se and a series ordered per accidens.
So per se and per accidens is more ways to say we're going to make up words that don't have anything to do with evidence and try to make these arbitrary distinctions, which can then work our definitions into God in. That doesn't actually do anything to explain anything.
Okay, so let me illustrate the difference. A series ordered per se would be like this. Here's an example. This is the example Thomas gives, Thomas Aquinas. A hand moves
I give this example. Thomas
a stick, which moves a stone. Another example would be dominoes. You flick one domino, and it starts this chain reaction where all the dominoes fall. Another example would be Rube Goldberg machines. Have you seen the Rube Goldberg machines? Where
yeah, of course,
it's this insanely complicated device where one thing just sets off this chain reaction that ends in all these interesting series of things happening.
Yeah,
and then there's the famous example of the turtles all the way down that you might recall. Legend has it that it was either Bertrand Russell or Max Planck were giving a lecture on the theory of gravity and how that explains why the Earth doesn't just fall in empty space. And an impatient old lady in the audience balks at the idea that the Earth could just be floating there in space. And then Russell or Max Planck asks the lady, says, well, what is the Earth resting on then? And then she says, well, it's resting on the shell of a big turtle. And he says, well, what?
That's correct, XZ. There could be multiple unmoved movers. It doesn't need to be one. So that is also a fallacy of the theist argument, is to assume there's only one unmoved mover when there could be a collection of unmoved movers. Multiple quantum fields could definitely exist and probably do.
Is that turtle resting on? And she says, another turtle. And he says, well, what's that one resting on? And she says, well, it's turtles all the way down. So that's, again, a classic example of a series ordered per se. Now, the problem with that is that it seems to just push explanation back indefinitely. You don't really get an explanation for why anything in the series is happening if it just goes on indefinitely.
Kind of like just saying God did it. Also, you don't get an explanation there either. It's kind of arbitrary. You can just arbitrarily say, must God daddy, not actual evidence.
Now, contrast that with a series ordered per accidens. So examples here would be one person begetting another, and then that person begets another. Another would be, actually, my favorite example would be, have you seen the movie Pay It Forward?
No, I haven't.
Well, the idea there is you do one act of kindness to someone, and then that will inspire them to do an act of kindness to someone else. And in the movie, this young boy's simple act of kindness winds up going viral and triggers this global chain reaction of acts of kindness. That would be a good example of a series ordered per accidens. Now, each member in a series ordered per accidens, it doesn't have to pass on what it received, right?
Angel A, shaking my head, poor TJump, a depraved, miserable man, can only pray for you, dude. Ironically, my depression has been cured, so not the case. But nice try, though.
The series could just stop with one person, right? Each member plays an active role to continue the series. They're not automatically passing along what they received in the way that members in a series ordered per se do. In a series ordered per se, each member plays a passive role, automatically passing along something that they got from an original source. So I know that's a bit much for the first argument, but when other arguments reject the possibility of an infinite series, most of them are going to be rejecting the possibility of an infinite series ordered per se, but not per accidens, if that makes sense.
All right, should we move on to the resources for this one?
Sure. I give a few resources on this distinction between these two kinds of regresses. So Patterson Brown's paper there is very influential, and Caleb Cahoe has some good stuff written on this recently.
All right, so let's move on to argument number 2, Aquinas' second way.
second way for the existence of an uncaused cause. Some things are caused. Whatever is caused by another. There cannot be an infinite series of causes. Again, that's a series ordered per se. So there must be an uncaused cause. Pretty straightforward.
And that doesn't imply God or a mind or anything. So yeah, there could be a quantum field is uncaused. So that answers this question. No evidence of a God needed. Next.
Okay, do you want to say anything else about that one, or should we move on?
Let's just move on.
Okay, I like that. All right, Aquinas' third way. Why don't I read this one because there's a lot to read here.
Yeah,
Actually, let me take this off the screen so that people can see all of the text here. All right, so premise number one, whatever is contingent at one time did not exist. If everything is contingent, then at one time nothing existed. If at one time nothing existed, then nothing would exist now. Something does exist now. So not every being is contingent, so there is a necessary being. Premise 7, either the necessary being gets its necessity from another or exists necessarily of itself. Premise 8, there cannot be an infinite regress of necessary beings that get their necessity from another. And then the conclusion, so there is a necessary being that exists necessarily of itself.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, but there you have it. Most of those premises I think are pretty straightforward.
Right. Where can people go to find out more about Aquinas' 5 ways? Like, what's a good resource for that?
No, I struggled with this. I didn't really come up with a good source. Anthony Kinney has a good book on Aquinas' 5 ways.
I mean, you mentioned Ed Feser here. Ed Feser is
Feser,
really
you
good.
know, if you're looking for a defense of Aquinas on anything, Feser's pretty much just as good of a source as any other. As Antoinette Gilson, he's pretty darn good on the 5 ways. There are actually philosophers who are starting to defend versions of the 5 ways that don't appeal to some of the more Aristotelian concepts that Aquinas assumes. One of them being one of my advisors, PhD advisor, Scott McDonald. I think he's got a paper called Aquinas' Parasitic Cosmological Argument, where it's an extended defense of the first way, using contemporary physics. So you can find defenses. I just didn't put a lot of research into that.
Right. Okay. All right. Let's move on to argument number 4. Samuel Clarke. And I haven't heard of this one, so I'm really curious. Like, I guess I'll let you read this one, and then
Sure.
I may ask a question or two about it.
So an important distinction for this argument is the distinction between contingent things and dependent things.
So that.
So a necessary being could also be quantum field. You can explain a quantum field as a necessary being. You do not need a God for that one either. No mind required. So all the Aquinas' ways can be explained until you get to the moral one as a quantum field, and even the quantum field in some kind of physical law could explain the moral thing. You don't need a God for that at all. So all of Aquinas' ways can be explained without a God, and none of them actually explain anything in physics. So you don't actually need them in physics. So all of Aquinas' ways are gibberish, garbage, and debunked by physics a long time ago.
People can see all of the text here. All right. So premise number 1, whatever is contingent at one time did not exist. If everything is contingent, then at one time is a lot more simple. I think it doesn't, like, this has some extra steps that I don't think are necessary, but I still like it. I like these arguments from dependence to an independent being.
I do too,
so like
and they're structurally similar to other cosmological arguments, but yeah, if you stick with the notion of dependence, yeah, I think that's pretty intuitive.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to some resources for this one.
Okay, we have Clarke's classic demonstration.
Oh, I guess I
William Rowe,
skipped.
Richard Gale.
It's a lot more simple.
Dependent beings. Okay. None of those conclude in God. So all that could be explained by a quantum field. So again, quantum field could explain that. So not evidence of God.
Well, I think it doesn't, like, this has some extra steps that I don't.
Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate the $5 super chat. Felix, no evidence quantum field can replace God. Like that's Felix. The whole point of the quantum field is that it can explain all the things this argument thinks are evidence. So none of these arguments are actually evidence. These arguments are just, I can't understand how something happened, therefore God. Except all of those things can happen without God. That's the point here. So we can explain all these things without God. Your ability to imagine them isn't evidence. So the point isn't to replace God. The point is to show that your arguments aren't evidence.
I don't think are necessary, but I still like it. I like these arguments from dependence to an independent being.
I do too,
so like
and they're structurally similar to other cosmological arguments, but yeah, if you stick with the notion of dependence, yeah, I think that's pretty intuitive.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to some resources for this one.
Okay, we have Clarke's classic demonstration, William Rowe, Richard Gale, and Bruce Reichenbauer.
There you go. Yeah, I was going to say that if you guys, so we're going to run through some of these really quickly. So when you see these resources, these resource slides, pause the video and then like jot down whatever you want, because I can't like put everything in the description of this video, all the different resources. There's actually a limited amount of space. But what I can do is make this Google slide presentation. I can make that available, so I will have that linked in the description after this video is completed. That way you can gain in that way, or like I said, you can just pause it and do it that way. All right, let's move on to argument number 5. We're only 5 in. Can you believe? And we're already like hitting some really heavy philosophy here. Like I said, these are not like, this is not your brother's argument that he like came up when he was 5 years old and was trying to share it with his other friend when they were just randomly debating God's existence. So these are very, very serious arguments, as you can see. I also like that, like, I mean, because some of these arguments, like, they weren't in this form, right? They weren't like deductive and like a syllogism like this, or like a structured deductive form. So you had to do a lot of that work yourself. So this is actually a huge resource. This is a huge resource. Okay, all right, let's so just why don't I read this one because you read the last one. All right, so here it is. Leibniz's cosmological argument. CA just means cosmological argument. We're gonna have to use some abbreviations here. All right, premise number 1: anything that exists has a sufficient reason for why it exists, either in another contingent being or in a necessary being. Number 2: the world exists. 3: therefore the world has a sufficient reason for why it exists, either in another contingent being or in a necessary being. But the sufficient reason for why the world exists cannot be in another contingent being, since A, the world just is the collection of all contingent beings, and B, the sufficient reason for the collection cannot be in its parts individually or collectively. So a sufficient reason for the world must be a necessary being outside the world. And the conclusion, therefore, there is a necessary being outside the world.
So the main premise here is going to be premise 4, and this was
premise 4. Premise 4 is, but the sufficient reason for why the world exists cannot be another contingent being. Quantum field. Like, we can just call the quantum field necessary. It answers the whole thing. None of this is particularly important.
David Hume's objection to the argument. He thought that this
Quantum field did it, therefore not evidence of God. So far, the first 5 arguments can all be explained by a non-God and are explained better by a non-God. Therefore, none of these are actually evidence of God. Again, none of these are actually evidence at all of anything. But if we accepted these arguments as evidence, they could all point to a quantum field and do so better than they would a God. So none of these are, in fact, evidence of a God.
This argument, premise 4 in particular, committed the fallacy of composition. If each part is contingent, why should we think that the whole is contingent? So, for example, if he thought it committed the fallacy like this, if each part of an engine weighs, I don't know, a pound, that doesn't follow that the engine weighs a pound. The engine is going to be a lot heavier than just a pound. But now, compare a different example. If each part of the wall, each brick of the wall is red, it does follow that the wall is red. So the question is contingency like color, or is it more like weight? And, well, I think it's more like color, right? It's not like weight. A bunch of contingent things together don't add up their contingency to be like more contingency in the same way that something lightweight things don't add up their weight to be more heavy, right? You don't get something that's more contingent just by adding up contingent things. So another way of objecting would be, if each part has an explanation, why think the whole must have an explanation? And here are a few examples to think that just if we've explained each part, that's not sufficient for explaining the whole. Richard Gale has this charming example. I'm modifying a little bit. Imagine that there are 5 philosophers on a particular street corner in New York City, and we want to know why there are 5 philosophers on this particular street corner in New York City. Well, one of them is there because his grandma lives around the block and he's going to see her. One is there because he's on the way to see a play. One is there because he just wanted to get outside and get some fresh air. One is there, and so on. So they each have their own individual reason for being on that street corner. That by itself doesn't explain why there are 5 philosophers on this street corner. That seems to cry out for more explanation. And the explanation there would be, oh, there's a meeting of the American Philosophical Association.
Thank you, Bjorn. Appreciate it. That's an awesome name, by the way. Bjorn Ironside from Vikings. Great name.
Happening in New York City on this weekend. You see how that works?
So there's something a little bit deeper. Yeah, there's got to be some extra explanation for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Alexander Proust gives a different example. He asks us, imagine a cannonball at rest at noon, and then it's fired. So we can ask, why is a cannonball moving 1 minute past noon? Well, because it was moving a half a minute past noon. But if that's true, then why was it moving a half a minute past noon? Well, because it was moving a quarter minute past noon. Why was it moving a quarter minute past noon? Well, because it was moving an 8 minute past noon. So why is it moving at any time past noon is the question. So even if its movement at any one time is explained by a prior time, it doesn't explain why the cannonball is moving at all. We need to eventually recourse to the fact that it was fired. So those are 2 examples of how, even if we have an explanation of a part, that doesn't necessarily mean we have an explanation of the whole.
Okay, let's move on to some resources for this one. Here we go. Or no, this is the next argument. Okay.
Yeah, so we have a Leibnizian cosmological argument that's defended by Stephen Davis and Bill Craig, which probably is familiar with your viewers. Everything that exists has an explanation. The universe exists, so the universe has an explanation. If the universe has an explanation, it's God, so God exists. The key premise.
Okay, everything that exists has an explanation. Reality does not have an explanation. Okay, argument over. Reality does not have an explanation. There's no explanation of reality. Brute facts can exist, so just the brute contingency is an object that exists with no explanation. Brute contingencies are logically possible. Therefore, premise 1 is false. Possible is not an explanation. Therefore, premise 1 is explanation. Premise 1 is false. All right, let's see. Let's just Google brute contingency. Brute contingency. Brute contingency, principle, sufficient reason. Derp. What is a brute contingency? A brute contingency could be different. It is just the particular way it is without an explanation. Say a universe exists necessarily means it couldn't have been different. That is totally different than proposing the universe exists as a brute fact. Not actually the case. You can say it's a brute fact. It was Reddit, freaking Reddit. Doesn't know shit. Brute fact. Brute contingency. Brute contingency, principle, sufficient reason. Like, if there is such a thing as a brute contingency, which is logically possible, then the principle of sufficient reason is provably false. So, nope.
There is 4, which he points out is logically equivalent to what the atheist has always maintained, which is that if God does not exist, the universe has no explanation. It's just brute. So it's a pretty strong argument.
I think this is the reason why most philosophers reject the PSR is because brute contingencies are logically possible and brute contingencies are totally fine. So that's why most philosophers reject the PSR, as far as I'm aware.
Okay, and
which they do. Like, the PSR is widely rejected by most philosophers.
Let's move on to some resources for that one. Stephen T. Davis, Cosmological Argument and the Epistemic Status of Belief in God. And William Craig's Reasonable Faith. Yeah, he's defended that one in a lot of his works. He's defended that one. Yeah. So, right, moving on. So now we are on to argument number 7. Proust, the Leibnizian argument from Alexander Proust. And I'll read this one because I just have such an affinity for Alexander Proust. All right, number 1 is every contingent fact has an explanation. Number 2, there is a contingent fact that includes all other contingent facts. Number 3, therefore there is an explanation of this fact. 4, this explanation cannot itself be a contingent fact. And then the conclusion, so the explanation of all contingent facts is necessary. What's like the number?
So again, even if we just grant this argument, necessary being could be quantum field. So necessary being does not imply a mind or God of any kind. Not evidence of God.
For one objection to this argument.
it's that the first premise is false. And the first premise is what's called the strong principle of sufficient reason. So they're just going to want to deny that.
Yeah, premise 1 could also just be false because it could just be like a brute fact. What is the PSR, principle of sufficient reason? PSR is the principle of sufficient reason, which states that everything that begins to exist, or that everything has a cause. It's possible that something, like there's just a potato that exists and it has no cause and it's always existed, kind of a thing, or the universe or a quantum field or whatever. And so it's possible that there are things that exist without causes, that would be called a brute fact. And a brute contingency is also a brute necessity. So brute and necessary can be the same thing too. The whole point here is that even if we grant the entire argument, which you don't have to, you can just say, no, brute contingencies are a logical possibility, therefore the PSR is wrong. So if the PSR is wrong, premise 1 is false, and you don't need any of that. Or you can just grant the whole argument and says, this indicates not a God. It just indicates a quantum field. So this argument fails in multiple very easy ways to tell it's a complete joke.
Every contingent fact has an explanation. There are brute facts.
Okay, and some resources for this one: the Leibnizian cosmological argument in Craig Moreland's The Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology, which I've got sitting on my shelf back here.
Nice D. I just explained why most philosophers reject the PSR because brute contingencies are logically possible. Since brute contingencies are logically possible, the PSR is false. Not everything that begins to exist has a cause, or not everything that exists has a cause. And therefore, the PSR is false. So if brute contingencies are logically possible, the PSR is false. Most philosophers think brute contingencies are definitely possible, so you don't need the PSR because it's false.
This one is also actually available on Proust's website, I believe. So if you just search for the title of this, then it'll pull up and you can watch it. You can read it for free if you want to learn more about his argument. And Proust, just like you need to know who he is. If you don't, you need to look him up. You need to look at what the sorts of things that he's saying. I've even featured a couple of his talks on this YouTube channel that you can go and watch. One of them was on the argument from beauty, and another one was a sort of newish argument for God's existence from paradoxes, like the Grim Reaper paradox that I discuss, or that I've had other philosophers on to talk about. All right.
Grim Reaper paradox is not evidence for a God. It's an argument against there being an infinite regress, which is also false because you would have to assume time follows the A theory of time, like everything happens sequentially. If time can jump or there's something that can manipulate time and start at multiple points, then it's not a paradox.
Argument number 8, the Gale.
So you asked what the strongest objection to the previous argument was. And it's what's called the strong principle of sufficient reason. Well, Alexander Proust and Richard Gale tried to come up with an argument based on a weak principle of sufficient reason, which is premise 1 here. For any proposition P, if P is true, then possibly there is a proposition Q that explains P. So it's a little bit weaker than that strong principle of sufficient reason.
Possibly. It's possible. I can imagine it. If it's possible for me to imagine it, then it's also possible for you to imagine an alternative.
Counter before. Premise 2, all contingently true propositions in the actual world form a big conjunctive proposition. They use the term fact, but just for consistency, I'll just use proposition. BCCP, big conjunctive.
That just means he's just saying, okay, contingent things are contingent. Like, great. All contingent things are contingent. What causes contingent things? That's the question here.
Contingent proposition. Possibly, this is premise 3, possibly there's a proposition Q that explains BCCP.
So contingent things could be explained by something else.
4, Q explains BCCP only if Q involves a necessary being. And this is because if Q were wholly contingent, Q would be in BCCP. So Q can't be contingent but necessary.
Okay, so he's moved the first premise to the fifth premise, and now we can just say the fifth premise is false because brute facts are a thing. That's all he's done here. So all the Gale-Proust argument does for contingency is it takes the first premise that explains the PSR and moves the PSR to the fifth premise. So if the PSR is false and there are contingent things, that disproves the argument. And the argument has failed for the exact same reason. You've just restated the same argument, which fails for the exact same reason. And both of the objections that I presented, which debunk the argument, apply in this argument, just like I did the last argument. 1, brute facts disprove the PSR. So argument false. 2, even if we grant every premise of the argument, doesn't indicate a God, could just be a quantum field. Argument false, not evidence of God.
Premise 5, there is a proposition Q that explains BCCP that involves a necessary being. And this follows from 3 and 4, and it's provable in S5, modal system S5, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And the argument is this. Look, if possibly Q explains P and Q explains P only if Q is necessary.
Jay, thank you for the like. I don't know, was that I think that's a Twitch like, isn't it? I assume so. What was the question? Jay, how is the quantum field a necessary existence? Exactly the same way a God is. Necessary existence is a thing made up by humans. It is a made up label to say the first most fundamental thing. So we can say the first most fundamental thing is a quantum field, and it is equally, or actually it's better supported that the quantum field is the more fundamental thing than a God is. So necessary existence is a made up human property to label the most fundamental thing, whatever the most fundamental thing is. And we have theists who are made up a whole bunch of different criteria they think that the necessary thing must have, but it's just their made up criterion. So whatever the necessary thing is, the minimum criteria for a necessary thing is the thing that is the base of all reality. Quantum fields could be that base. It is the best explanation of that base, so quantum fields are the best thing that could qualify as a necessary being. God doesn't even work for many, many reasons. One being consciousness has never been seen outside of brains. And to say that the most fundamental thing has a brain makes no sense because the fundamental thing is a composite of matter.
Then possibly Q is necessary. In other words, if Q is possibly necessary, but if Q is possibly necessary, it follows in modal system S5 that it is necessary. So Q. Then we're on.
Extreme. Are you saying quantum fields came from nothing and it always exists? That's extreme. That's a contradiction. If it came from nothing, it didn't already exist. Quantum fields always existed. They are outside of space-time, existing all through space-time, omnipresent, essentially, and eternal. They were never created. Nothing came from nothing. There was always reality. There was always quantum fields.
Premise 6, Q explains BCCP only if Q reports a personal explanation. And the reason here is that there's a distinction between personal explanations and scientific explanations.
Felix, it doesn't have consciousness. Quantum fields don't have consciousness. There's no intentionality, no brain, no feelings. It's just a field like gravity. So it's not exactly like God. We've debunked this argument many times, saying, oh, you're just changing the definition of God is a silly theist argument that theists like to use to try and like avoid the fact that, yeah, there could be other things than God that created the universe. Prove that's physics, just basic physics of what quantum fields is. Google quantum field.
Scientific explanations are explanations in terms of the laws of nature, law-like generalities. Personal explanations are explanations in terms of agents and their intentions. So if we ask the question, why is the water boiling? You could give a scientific explanation in terms of the mean kinetic energy, the water molecule, blah, blah, blah. Or you could give a personal explanation, which is that I wanted to make some tea. So we have this distinction between these two kinds of explanation. Well, they point out, Gale and Cruz point out that because...
Molecular Academy. Wrong, TJump. All of these arguments are evidence. Evidence that theists lack confidence. I mean, lack epistemology. I mean, that's true. So all of these arguments are evidence that theists don't know how epistemology works. They're evidence that theists have crappy evidence. They're evidence that theists have way too much spare time. They're evidence that philosophers don't do anything real. It's evidence of lots of things, just not of a god.
Scientific explanations are just generalizations over all contingent reality. Scientific explanations must also be contingent. So scientific explanations can't involve only contingent propositions, all of which are already included in BCCP. So
which god of thousands means nothing. The second law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created or destroyed. That's the first law. The first law of thermodynamics is energy cannot be created or destroyed. The second law is entropy. So almost right. The first law says energy cannot be created or destroyed. Therefore, that rules out God. That would be correct.
No scientific explanation, no proposition reporting a scientific explanation can explain BCCP. So whatever proposition explains BCCP, and this is the conclusion, it must, premise 6, must report a personal explanation. And so the conclusion, there's a proposition Q that explains BCCP.
Where's the personal thing? Personal. For any proposition P, proposition Q that explains P, all contingent. So it's all, there's a lot of contingent things. Q explains only if it involves a necessary being. There's a proposition P that explains necessary being. Q explains only if it reports a personal explanation. What is no? So 6 is just false. No. Like you can have a necessary being, like a quantum field that doesn't have any personal explanation. So 6 is false. You do not need a personal being. That's just an assertion based on you imagine it to be the case. You do not need that.
P that involves a necessary being and reports a personal explanation.
Yeah, so this one, someone's noting in the comment section that this one is a little bit more on the complex side, which is okay. We're going to get even into more complex waters, a whole lot more complex when we start talking about ontological arguments, which is section number 2. So if that...
It's funny. Like the most simplest define God into existence arguments are the most complex because they're going to try to like bamboozle you with fancy words. The worst, most gibberish arguments are the most complex because they want to like smuggle God in the hardest to detect ways possible.
That was too much, then just get ready because it's about to get a lot worse. So there's that. But then I was going to say something that's... Let me say this first. So my favorite, not my favorite, but a really cool thing about this argument, let me pull it back up here, is that Gale is an atheist. He's I don't know if he's agnostic technically, but he's definitely not a theist. He's a non-theist. Yet, I just want you to note that he's developed this argument for God's existence with Alexander Proust, and he's defended his literature. Like that to me shows a big difference between what happens in the philosophy world, like the academic world, as opposed to what happens on YouTube and in debates on Facebook and on Twitter and stuff. It's like in the philosophy world and academic world, they're not afraid to steel man arguments, to attempt to better the other side's position. And so it's just, I don't know, I find that really, really interesting. Gale, he's a non-theist himself, yet he's defended this argument and developed a dialectic that way. It's just
I think Gale's work is very underappreciated. It's brilliant, and his writing is superb. I love Gale's writing. You should, if you haven't read much Richard Gale, you should. But the point I wanted to make earlier is that the more complicated arguments are going to be in these first few categories, cosmological and ontological. It gets easier from there.
Good to note. All right, so let's move on to some resources for this one, which is just Richard Gale and Alexander Proust's A New Cosmological Argument, and that you can find in Religious Studies. Okay, moving on to cosmological argument, and this is argument number 9. So I'll go ahead and read this one. This one's got a lot on the screen here. PPE, and is that just a principle? What is PPP? PPE
let me
stand
take
for?
this one, yeah, because I've got my notes on this one. It's a little bit, it might not be transparent.
Okay.
So two philosophers, Katz and Kramer, they think that you can run a cosmological argument without the principle of sufficient reason, based on this principle, and it's the principle of epistemic explanations, they call it. Okay, so kind of a mouthful there. And it's PPE. Given that one, there's a possible explanation of the fact that F, and two, any possible explanation of the fact that F entails P, it's reasonable to believe P. Here's an example. The match is on fire. Any possible explanation of that fact entails that there's oxygen in the atmosphere. So it's reasonable to believe that there's oxygen in the atmosphere. Okay, so we can run the argument with PPE. 1. The proposition that there's a unique necessary being who brought about the existence of everything other than itself by willing that the other being should exist would, if true, explain why there are contingent beings. There is a possible explanation of the fact that there are contingent beings. And so 1 and 2, premise 3 here, there is no proposition consistent with the claim that there are only contingent beings, which if true would explain why there are contingent beings. But 1 and 2 together satisfy PPE. That's the principle. Given that 1, there's a possible explanation of the fact that there are contingent beings, and 2, any possible explanation of the fact that there are contingent beings entails P, there's a necessary being. It's reasonable to believe that P, there is a necessary being. So 1 and 2 together, it just satisfies the main principle here. We have premise 3 and the premise 4, any possible explanation of the fact that there are contingent beings entails that there is a necessary being. And so the conclusion, it's reasonable to believe that there is a necessary being.
Okay, so the point of this argument is to avoid the second criticism I gave, which is the fact that we can just reject the PSR. If the PSR is false, then there's like brute facts. Brute facts exist, therefore it's wrong to say that everything that exists has a cause or whatever. So this one's trying to avoid that criticism. I mean, it doesn't avoid the second criticism, or the other criticism. The criticism I said that even if we grant all of this, a quantum field could be the necessary being, no evidence of God. So even if we grant all of the arguments for the past 45 minutes of this video, none of them indicate a God at all. But let's see if this actually does avoid the PSR. The fact that if a being who brought everything into existence should exist, if true, would explain why contingent beings exist. Okay, so if everything had an explanation, that would be an explanation. So there is a possible explanation of the fact there are contingent beings. There is no proposition consistent with the claim that there are only contingent beings, which, if true, would explain why there are contingent beings. There is no proposition consistent with the claim that there are only contingent beings would explain why there are contingent beings. So it's essentially just saying, so premise 3 says brute facts don't exist. That's what premise 3 is saying. So premise 3 is false. Like pretty much every philosopher that is not an idiot grants brute contingencies are possible. So premise 3 is false. This argument is false. And so this argument is essentially just a restatement of the PSR. It's just giving a different version of the PSR with lots more words that does nothing. So this isn't the cosmological argument without the PSR. It's just a restatement of the PSR with other words. Saying premise 3 is just, there are no brute contingencies, which is the PSR.
Okay, I'm not going to add a whole lot on this one other than to say maybe we should move on to get some resources on this one. Do you want to talk about that resource at all, or should we just move on?
Let's just move on.
Okay, easy enough.
Okay.
Yeah, you're going to have to take this one too.
Yeah, this is, okay, Kuhn's cosmological argument, published in 1997, was instrumental in launching a lot of different cosmological arguments. Very influential cosmological argument, and it's extremely logically tight. Okay, so it's based on certain mereological axioms, a few principles of causation, and then the argument's off and running. It's similar to the Leibnizian cosmological argument, except with cause but not explanation. Okay, so here are the mereological axioms. Mereological just being study of parts and wholes. So axiom 1: X is a part of Y if and only if anything that overlaps X overlaps Y. Overlaps just means they share a part in common. Axiom 2: If there's a thing of type C, then there's an aggregate or sum of all such types. 3: X is identical to Y if and only if X is a part of Y and Y is a part of X. 4: If a whole exists, so do all of its parts. And 5: If all parts of a whole exist, so does the whole. Now these axioms of mereology are not very controversial, so he's just kind of taking them for granted. Now here's a definition: a wholly contingent thing is something that has no necessary parts. It's entirely contingent, nothing necessary about it. Okay, 3 principles of causation. First,
is that the next slide?
Yeah, next slide. First, only actual existent things can be causes or effects. Seems pretty reasonable. Second, a cause and its effect must be distinct. The cause can't overlap its effect. And then third, every wholly contingent thing has a cause. Now the argument runs as follows. Next slide. All parts of a necessary thing are necessary. That follows from axiom 4. And K is just system modal logic. In modal logic, every contingent thing has a wholly contingent part. The first and second axioms. Definition: let C be the aggregate of all wholly contingent reality. 3: If there are any contingent things, C is wholly contingent thing. That follows from A1, A3, the definition, and lemma 1. Lemma 4: If there are any contingent things, C has a cause. Follows from lemma 3 and the C3, which I think is just a different. C3, the third principle of causation. Every contingent thing overlaps C. And then we can derive from these theorem. If there are any contingent things, then the cosmos, the sum of all wholly contingent things, has a cause that is a necessary thing. Now, I said it's a very tight argument, and you can see how tight it is if you just look at my own simplification here in the next slide. Premise 1, there are contingent things. 2, the cosmos is the sum of all wholly contingent things. Now, he's just defining the cosmos in that way.
So all of natural reality is contingent things. Like, nope, premise 2 false. So if you just define all of reality as things that could be otherwise, you can just say God is a collection of contingent things. Well, does that debunk God as being necessarily contingent? No. Composition division fallacy, as you mentioned earlier. You can just say the collection of all contingent things doesn't necessarily need to be itself contingent. The collection of contingent things could be a result of a necessary thing, which is also natural. So the cosmos, which means all natural stuff, does not necessarily mean it is itself contingent.
3, the sum of all wholly contingent things is a wholly contingent thing. That's what most of what we just covered.
Composition division fallacy. No. If it is a sum or a result, like for example, I could say that no, not the cosmos is not all individual contingent things. There could be a necessary thing mixed in with the cosmos. Like cosmos could mean reality. Like the reality, which would be a combination of, if there was a God plus all contingent things, would not itself be all contingent because it has a necessary thing in it. So even if the necessary thing does exist, you can say the cosmos or reality is the necessary thing plus all the contingent things. So 2 and 3 is false.
Which is established, and that is derived. That's not really premise. That's derived from the axioms and definitions. 4, so the cosmos is a wholly contingent thing. 5, each wholly contingent thing has a cause. That's the key premise of the argument. And then 6, so the cosmos has a cause that is not a contingent thing, namely a necessary thing. Now, what's cool about this argument is if you accept the axioms and you accept those 3 principles of causation, it all follows. The conclusion follows. The only premise in this argument, other than the fact that there are contingent things, which isn't, that's a pretty safe assumption, the only premise of this argument is 5. Each wholly contingent thing has a cause. And he defends 5 by saying that he just appeals to empirical science. He says every success of common sense in sciences is by reconstructing causal antecedents of things that we observe in nature. So everything that we see that's contingent is a cause. So that's really the main premise there. And this is a good example of how these outlines are just a tip of an iceberg of material that you can get into.
To put it lightly, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
So here is some resources here. Okay, so I decided that I wasn't going to do like anything to kind of break up the monotony, but after that one, I've got to. So we are on, that was 10 arguments. I'm going to do 10 push-ups. We're going to see how this goes. You can join me if you want. You don't have to, but and unfortunately, people aren't going to be able to see me do these. So I don't know. We'll just see how it goes.
All right, so this seems like a good point to take a break. So he's done 10 arguments. He's going to do 10 push-ups. We've been going for about 2 hours. I think that'll be a good point to take a break. If you guys want, if there's any videos you guys want me to debunk, put those in my Discord. There's a section called Vids You Want Debunked. I will go through the entire section of all the videos in there as best I can. Lucky 7 Wolf and God can leave an empty tomb. Yes, so can robbers. Quantum field could definitely explain the empty tomb. Like quantum tunneling is a thing, but yeah, that's funny, Lucky. You're a funny Lucky. You're a funny atheist. All right, guys, I'm gonna head out, get some food. It's dinner time for me, so I will see you guys later. Thanks for stopping by. Put your videos you want debunked in the Vids You Want Debunked section on my Discord, and I will get to those eventually. Peace out.